Hi traders, TradingView released version 6 of PineScript syntax. Now, for those of you who are new up to programming, syntax just means the way we express our code. It is kind of like grammar in English. There are different rule sets for each version of PineScript. In the past, a version change usually meant big changes to how we express our code in PineScript. But version 6 is a little bit different. It actually doesn't change the syntax of our code. So far, at least as of November 2024, when it released, it is basically exactly the same as version 5. So, even though a lot of the lesson in the course are for version 5, the examples and the code expressed in these lessons should still work for version 6. I will go through and try to update the source code of all the lessons to version 6. So, if the video doesn't match the code version, don't be alarmed. The only difference from 99% of the scripts in the course should be the version change from version 5 to version 6. So in the video it might say version 5 at the start of the script, but the code below the video will be version 6 syntax. If version 6 does break a feature of an existing lesson, I will re-record that lesson entirely. But so far as the release of PineScript version 6, it does not break version 5 scripts. And they have made this change to version 6 because they have made a lot of under the hood changes to the back end of PineScript to make it more efficient, better optimized, so that it runs faster on our charts, so that our code executes much faster on our charts, which is better for everyone who uses TradingView. It is a shared resource that we all use. I just wanted to ease any concerns for you guys that join the course. You see some of the lessons are in version 5 and wondering if that code will work with version 6. The short answer is yes, it will. If it doesn't, as I said, I will fix that lesson, re-record everything and explain how to do it in version 6. But so far, no changes to syntax, just improvements across the board to how PineScript works on the backend. With that said, enjoy the rest of the course. Alright, traders, let us have a look at the Pine editor to begin things. For those of you who are familiar with this, you will probably want to skip this lesson. But for those of you who are brand new to PineScript, this is what you will need to know about the Pine editor. First of all, you can find it by clicking on the Pine editor button down here. This is your script title. And to create a new script, you click on this little button here and come down to create new. And you can create an indicator, a strategy, or a library. For the start of the course, we will focus on indicators because that is where most traders should begin. Strategies are obviously going to be more complicated. They enter and exit mock trades or demo trades in the strategy tester. We will cover that later in the course. Libraries are also an advanced feature. You should not really need to touch libraries unless you are creating complex scripts that share code amongst each other. So, a library is like a bucket of code that can be referenced by any script that imports that library into its code. So, it is a very useful feature, but it is quite an advanced feature that most traders won't need to use unless you are publishing your scripts publicly or writing lots of scripts to share code. So we will cover that later on in the course. When you are first starting out, it could be useful to click on the built-in strips here and you can have a look at how TradingView have written their own scripts. So for example, if we come down to let us do a moving average, simple click on that. This will open the code to the TradingView indicator source code. Now this is in version 5. The latest version of script is version 6. So it does not really matter. As you can see here, this is a giant mess. There is no commenting. It is not very organized. This is bare bones code. So don't be overwhelmed when you see this. Your code should not look like this. As I will show you throughout the course, if you are new to coding, we will do a much better job of formatting our code, explaining what the code does. So it is not just a wall of random gibberish text and you can actually understand what your code is doing. To experienced coders, they can read this at a glance. But for beginner coders, this sort of formatting is terrible. So don't worry. Throughout the course, we will write much better code than this and you won't be overwhelmed by the complexity. Let us go back to a blank indicator. So the main thing you need to know about the Pine editor is that little drop down box here. First of all, you can rename your script. You can access your recently used scripts and my screen is zoomed in here. If I zoom it out a little bit, you can also open a script that you have been working on. Any script that you have saved will show up in this list. So this is all the script related settings. You also have this button here. Click that to add your script onto the chart and you can see what your code is doing. You can also publish an indicator here, which I will show you how to do later in the course. We have our editor settings. So autocomplete is when you are writing code. You will see this box pop up here. I would recommend leaving this turned on. There is no reason not to. It displays suggestions when you type. Saves us a ton of time. So now when you are typing, let us do a plot for example. This draws themes to the chart. If I hit control space, that will show me all the different parameters I can pass into this function. I will explain what parameters are and everything later on in the course. But just know that hitting control space as you are typing will bring up code suggestions and make sure to have that on. Minimap is this thing in the corner. So if I open a more advanced script, let us open up this one here and come to editor settings and turn on the minimap. On the right side of my screen here, you can see this sort of window here. This is showing what is currently visible in my Pine editor. And if I zoom out my chart to 100%, you can see that the highlighted section there is tracking what is visible on my screen. So the minimap is very useful for really advanced complex scripts with lots and lots of lines of code. I personally don't love that. I usually leave that off unless I am working with an advanced script because it just adds clutter into my editor. I don't like it, but that is a matter of preference. I would recommend leaving that on. There is no reason not to. It also comes with the little compiler or console. This is where information is printed to your screen to tell you what your script is doing. If there is any error in the script, they will show up down here. So you click this little button to bring that window up. We will go over that later on in the course when we are actually making code or writing code. Line length guide will turn on. And if I zoom out my chart a bit, this line here that you can see, this gray line is the recommended line length to make your code more readable. Personally, I don't like having that there. It is a good rule of thumb to keep your lines of code as short as reasonably possible. So for example, with this line function, if I had latest add a lot of parameters, let us add force overlay equals true, and we will add style equals styles line style solid. As you can see, this text goes off my chart. This line recommended guide thing here would typically be used to format your code so that you can keep everything on your screen and easy to read. Personally, I don't really like doing that. It is an optional thing to do. Personally, for some lines of code, I don't really care if it goes off my screen there. So I like to turn that off because it is again just less clutter in my editor. But there is a matter of preference. Inlay hints for imports. This is for libraries. I would leave this on. Don't bother touching this. Same with this as well. Leave these two settings on. There is no reason to turn them off, and you will see what they do later on in the course. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. So that is all you really need to know about this so far. Just to wrap up this overview, I will go over a few other things here. You can open the editor in a new window and have that on your second monitor if you want to. If you close that window, it just comes back down here. You can open the editor in a new tab. I rarely ever use these features, but they are useful if you are working on a particularly complex script. Pine logs is very important. This will just show you debugging logs. Debugging is code jargon for error analysis or bug analysis. We are looking for any issues in our script. We can print into this log what our script is doing so that if we are working with a particularly complex indicator or strategy, we can print into this log what our script is doing so that if we are working with a particularly complex indicator or strategy, we can print this log using the logs function. So if I detect that my script is doing something that it shouldn't be, I could write it here an error message. Save my code. And now you can see this log is populated with an error message on every single bar on my chart because this is executing on every bar on my chart. And you can see the timestamps there, the dates and everything. This is a very useful tool for figuring out what your script is doing if it is doing something that you don't want to do. If your script has gone rogue, this is a good way to find out why user manual is very useful. Obviously, you can click this to open the user manual in a new tab, and this will tell you everything you need to know about PineScript. It is not very easy to navigate. That is the whole reason I put this course together. A lot of us, including myself, learn a lot better usually and through examples and seeing people work through these concepts. But if you get stuck on something or there is something that is not covered in the course, this is the first place you should go user manual. We also have the reference manual built into the chart itself. This is extremely useful for figuring out what certain functions do. So, for example, if we want to know how to enter a trade, we can type in strategy int entry. Click on this list item and this will explain everything we need to know about the entry function for opening or adding to a position. Again, the information here is quite technical. It is not really written for people who are new to programming. Most documentation for coding is not. It is mostly written for people who already know how to code. If you are not new to coding, then this is obviously a great resource to refer to when you are building out your scripts. And if you are new to coding, this is still a great resource. But obviously, you will want to go through at least the first beginner section of this course before you will understand a lot of this. Another way to open up the reference menu, a really convenient way is to hold down Control or Command on a Mac and click on the function same. So, for example, if I want to know everything a plot can do, if I hold down Control and click on this, this will bring up the reference manual directly to that function and explain every input that we have to work with. Then we have release notes. This is great for active orders who want to stay in the loop and understand everything that PineScript is updating. This is the first place you will find the latest feature added to PineScript. You have a bunch of keyboard shortcuts that you can use. A lot of these are pretty intuitive, like Control S or Command S to save our script, Control O to open a script, etc. I recommend reading through this for those of you who are very experienced with coding. For those of you who are not, maybe come back to this later on once you understand what you are doing. One just thing I want to mention is that we have this version control button here. So if I go back to this script, for example, and I click on this button, this will show me every time I have saved my script. It will show me the changes I made. So if you make a change to your script later on when you are working in this script and you screw something up that was working before, that is a common thing that programmers do. I will try to add a new feature to a script and bring something entirely. This is a great way to fix that rather than having to save manual backups of your script, which is really difficult to do and or at least difficult to remember to do. That is all done automatically for us in the version history, which is super convenient. So this is the latest version of my script. If the latest version of my script is broken and I want to refer to a previous version, I can click on one of these and click restore this version down the bottom right. That will revert my code back to that version. It will still save the last version of my code. So this is a great way to jump around and go back, and if you broke something in your script, you can maybe go back to the last functioning version of your script and start again with implementing whatever feature you were trying to do. Lesson number 2. Now, before we get into actually writing code, it is probably a good idea for me to go over some of the basic things you will need to know about the compiler for PineScript. The compiler is what compiles our code, converts it into information that TradingView servers can understand. So all of this English written code will turn into computer code that the computer can run and execute our commands. The PineScript compiler is responsible for doing that. So when I click save here, I am just going to delete this script after. So I will just name this delete my script just compiled, and I know it compiled because I did not get any errors. If however we do something like this, let me get rid of one of these parentheses here and save the script. Now we have a problem. We have a syntax error. This red line here. Now the wonderful thing about most programming languages and compilers is that they will usually tell you where the error happened. So we get the exact line that this error occurred. It occurred on line 6. This line here. So that makes it really easy for us. You can even click on this. It is a link that will take you to that line of code in your script. So if I click on that, it takes me straight here. Now every error message will be different depending on what you mess up in your script. A lot of these error messages are quite cryptic. So end of line without line continuation. Even I did not know what that really means. It's amusing to me. Some of the error messages you get in some programming languages, sometimes they are really helpful. Sometimes you are just like, oh, thanks compiler. That was really helpful. So now if I close this off and save my script, we don't have any errors. The compiler compiled our code without any problems. Let us try getting rid of one of these quotation marks. Save the script. Now we get a different error. Mismatched character. This character here means we have a new line starting. So PineScript got the end of this line and then a new line started, but it was expecting this quotation mark to close off this string of text, and so it threw an error on line 5. So most of the problems in your script are going to be pretty obvious and intuitive. When you see an error pop up, usually it means you did not close something off. You miss a comma, you miss a bracket, something like that. And within just a few seconds of reading your code back, you should be able to spot the problem. Now, some errors will be a little more difficult to solve, but in PineScript, it is very rare that you run into an error that cannot be solved very quickly, because usually it is a result of a typo of some kind, and you don't even need to know what the error message means. You can just click on that line of code and see at a glance that you missed something relating to the syntax. I will cover errors in your code in much more detail in its own section of the course towards the end of the course. So if you run into any problems, maybe jump ahead and check out that section. But the last thing I am going to show you here is what happens if we get rid of the compiler directive. If I get rid of that and save the script, now we are going to get all kinds of weird problems and errors with our code. The reason for that is that the compiler now doesn't know what version of PineScript we are using. So right now we are using the original version of PineScript, the versionless version of PineScript, the first iteration of this language. I have no idea what the syntax is for the language. Now we are on version 5. The good news is it is not that much different to version 4. If I set the version to 4, save the script, we will still get the same error because in version 4 of PES script, we don't use the indicator annotation function. We use the study annotation function to create an indicator. So now we script just compiled fine, and so it is very important that you keep this compiler directive in and that you get your syntax correct in your code. You don't need these comments if you don't want them there. This will compile just fine as well. The reason why we have this compiler directive that allows us to target older versions of PineScript is for backwards compatibility. So there are hundreds, if thousands of scripts that have been written from the beginning of TradingView's existence that are still very useful even though they were written in an old version of PineScript. And rather than force all of those coders to update their code to version 5 of PineScript, TradingView simply allow you to target old versions of PineScript so that you don't need to update your scripts for them to work. The only reason you would want to update your script to version 5 of PineScript is to take advantage of the new feature of that version. So I have dozens of indicators written in version 4. I am not going to convert all of them into version 5 of script except for the ones that I use regularly. Now one last thing I want to mention about the compiler is that it is not particularly picky about where you put some of your syntax. For example, if you have a plot function that has a lot of parameters which we will cover in future lessons, you can separate them across multiple lines. Now there are some rules with this that takes some getting used to, but let me just quickly demonstrate what I mean by this. So for example, we could put a space between our plot and our parenthesis. Save the script and this will work just fine. No problems, no compiler errors. We can also split our parentheses across multiple lines. So if I press enter here and I tab indent this line of code and I save the script, we will get an error in PineScript. If you want to indent your parameters across multiple lines, you need to put a space after your tab. So now if I save the script, this compiles just fine. So the purpose of being able to do this is maybe you have a bunch of parameters in your plot function that stretch way off your screen. You can separate these onto multiple lines to make it easier to read your code. So for example, if I put a comma here and then enter, I could say offset equals 1, comma, title equals plot close, comma, a line width equals 2, comma, and let us set the color to color dot black. And then let us move this parenthesis down one line. Now if I save the script, this compiles just fine. So we will cover this sort of thing in future lessons. I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that the compiler is quite flexible when it comes to your syntax, just so long as everything is in the right order and you respect some of the indentation rules, which we'll cover in future lessons as well. But anyway, I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that we can do this sort of thing in PineScript. The compiler will allow us to separate our code across multiple lines under certain circumstances as long as we respect certain syntax rules. I will leave it there because I don't want to overwhelm you guys with too much information before we actually cover what all of these parameters do. But now at least you know that when we get into future advanced lessons that this sort of thing is possible if you need to separate your code across multiple lines. Anyway, that about sums it up for the compiler. I am sure we will run into other issues that I have not covered here that we will address in future lessons, especially the error sections of the course. So I will wrap up this here and I will see you in the next lesson. Alright traders. Lesson number 3. So in this session I am going to be breaking down how comments work in PineScript. So comments are basically a way of leaving notes in your code for yourself or for other traders or coders who read your script. So right here I have a blank indicator script using the default template that TradingView have created, and you can see two comments at the top here. These are automatically added to all scripts that you create through the Pine editor. This top comment here is saying that our source code is subject to the terms of Mozilla public license. And here is a link to that license if you want to read what this means. The entire risk as to the quality and performance of the covered software is with you, and you being the script user or anyone who uses your script basically is using your script at their own risk. Most open source software will operate under a license like this. And then next up we have our copyright. So this is a copyright, and then it will automatically insert your TradingView username here. Now both of these components are not ready by the PineScript compiler. What that means is when the engine that runs your script through the TradingView platform does its thing, it ignores these lines. It is like they don't exist, and this is all the compiler will see. In fact, it will really only see this. So these comments are really just for your eyes only, and the way you write them is with two forward slashes. You can put them anywhere. They don't need to be at the start of the line. They could be after the line. So I could say here declare my indicator. Here we could say plot the close, and you can even use them to comment out code. So let us say we want to get the RSI here, 14 period RSI on the closing price. Let us say there is a problem with our code, or there is something we want to test and we want to temporarily remove this code without deleting it. We can just add two comments in front of it, and now this code is ignored by the compiler. So that is the purpose of comments, to leave notes to yourself. One other purpose which we will cover in future lessons is what is called annotation comments. So this right here is an annotation comment. It is a special comment that is not ignored by the compiler but technically is not code. You could think of this as kind of like metadata if you are familiar with metadata. So this is just telling PES script that we want to work with version 5 of PES script. If we get rid of this and compile our script, we are now dealing with the original version of PineScript which had no version, and we are going to get all kinds of errors because of that, because the syntax of version 5 of PES script is very different to prior versions. And by syntax I just mean the grammar of the language. The way we express our code is different in version 5 than any other version. If I bring back that annotation comment and save the script now, it compiles just fine. So that is the purpose of comments. We will be using them a lot in our scripts. I highly encourage you to comment your script heavily. It is always better to have too many comments than not enough comments. The reason for that is there will be times when you write a script and you will come back to it weeks, maybe even months or years later, and you might not remember why you did things a certain way or why your code was written the way it was. Having comments can help remind you why you did what you did, and it can help other traders to know what you are trying to do with your code as well. So, if you are writing public open source script, I definitely encourage you to comment them. And it is just a good idea in general to get into a habit of commenting your code regularly and extensively so that you know what you are doing. And it is kind of like if you remember in school when you did math stuff, you always had to show your work, you needed to explain how you got to your answer. Comments are basically the same thing. Using comments can explain how you got to where you got to in terms of your solution in your code. If I open up script I have been working on recently, which is my Gen library, you can see that this script has, I think, more comments in it than actual lines of code. In fact, it certainly does have more comments in it than actual lines of code. Now, that is not a normal thing. You would not normally see that in most scripts, but because this is a library and we will get into libraries in future lessons, I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information, but each comment here explains what each block of code does in great details. The reason for this is that this library is designed so that I could give it to a complete stranger who knows nothing about me, who knows nothing about how I like to code, and they can work out exactly to a T what every single part of my code does. If I get rid of all these comments, the code becomes significantly harder to read because there is no explanation on what is happening. I get rid of all these comments and we are just left with this. This is not useful to most traders. Most traders will see this and they will just move on to a different script because no one has the time to reverse engineer and deconstruct exactly what this code does. But by having all these comments, suddenly the script is much easier to read for everyone who is unfamiliar with what the code does. So that is the purpose of comments. We will be using them a lot throughout the course. So if I said before, it is good idea to get into a habit of using them, but don't worry, you will see lots of examples of how to use comments in your code in future lessons. So if this does not quite make sense to you, don't worry. It will by the end of the course. See you in the next session. Lesson number 4. Hi traders, welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to covering indicator annotation function. Now, annotation function could be also thought of as like a directive function. It is a special function that tells PineScript important information about the general nature of your script. So this comment here over at version 5 is what is called a compiler directive. So this is a directing the compiler to version 5 of PineScript. It is telling PineScript, the engine that runs PineScript, to treat the code of this script by the rules of version 5 of PineScript. The indicator annotation function does the exact same thing except that it tells PineScript to treat the code of this script as an indicator. The reason we need to use this is because there are a couple of different variations of script types. So we have a strategy scripts. So if I call this strategy, that changes the rules of the script. If I say library, that changes the rules again. So only we have three to work with: indicator, strategy and library, because each of those have different rules that govern your script. For this reason, we are going to break down the indicator function, which is probably the script type that you will be working with the most, especially in the beginning of your PineScript journey. So let us break down the parameters of this function. So by calling this an indicator function that gives the script access to a different subset of inbuilt functions and commands to work with. So for example, let us try and use a strategy function here. Let us say strategy close, and we need to pass an ID here. Let us just say close our buy trade. So if I save this script, we will get an error here that says you cannot use strategy functions in indicator scripts. Please replace indicator with strategy. So that is why we need to use these annotation functions. If I change this to strategy, suddenly the script is treated differently by the PineScript compiler. It has different functionality and features. But let us stick with indicator for this lesson and let us break down what we can do with this indicator function. So if I hover my mouse over indicator and hold down Control or Command on a Mac and click on this function on the name of this function, we will get the PineScript language reference manual popping up here. And this will tell us all of the various arguments we have to work with here. It will give us a description of each one. I am going to break down the most common ones here that you will most likely use in most of your scripts. So let us get rid of our title for a moment here and hover my mouse over this function name, and we will get a list of arguments. So the first one we have is title. So this is your long title. So let us say I have to call this my super fancy script, and if I save this and move this down a bit, you can see that my script name has changed here. And if I were to publish this script to the tradingview library, this is what it would be called on the tradingview library. This is its long title. This is its more descriptive title. But you can see that it takes up quite a lot of space on your chart. And if we do a lot of plots here, a lot of numbers plotting out here, having a long indicator title name could be a problem. So let us say we want to abbreviate this to MSFS. To do that, we just add in a comma here. All of our arguments in any function are separated by commas. So to add another argument or parameter to this function, we need to put a comma there. And then I need to pass in short title, and then this is a string as well. So we open up with two quotations, and let us say we want to call this MSFS. Now if I save the script, watch our title name here. It is now abbreviated to MSFS, but our official title is still my super fancy script. But if I were to publish this to the TradingView library, that is still what this script would be called. But when it is added to our chart, This is what it will say in the indicator box. So that is how our title work. Next up, we have overlay. So by default, overlay is set to false. So if I save the script, having it set to false draws into its own box. You can see we are in our own oscillator box here, like the RSI or stochastics, MACD, those sorts of indicators, they are drawn into their own indicator box. They are not drawn directly on the price action like a moving average would, for example. But if you want to draw over price action, you say you are working with a moving average script. For example, you want the overlay to be set to true. Overlay just means it overlays over your price action. So if we set this to true and save the script first, nothing will happen because we are already added the script to our chart. So to update this particular parameter, we need to remove our script by clicking on this remove button here and then read it to our chart. So now when I click add to chart, overlay will be updated and it will be drawing over price action. So if I zoom in here, you can see that this script is just plotting the closing price. So it is connecting the closing price of all these candles on my chart directly over price action. So that is what overlay does. Next up, we have a format. So let us set the overlay back to false and remove the script. Save it. Add it back to my chart. And let us say we want to plot volume instead of the closing price. So now let us save the script and it will update. Hopes will update. And now it is plotting the volume of each bar onto my chart. Let me go out to the daily so that we get a higher number here. So notice this number down here is an exact number of the volume printed. It is not that readable. We don't really need to know the exact quantity of shares traded on a stock or in the crypto market. How many of a particular crypto asset was traded? In this case, we are dealing with ticks, price ticks on the forex market, tick volume. We don't need to know the precise number. So if you are dealing, this is mostly useful for volume. This I don't really know of any other use cases where you would want to do this. But this format parameter you can see down there above the blue underline. Format can be set to format dot, and if I press Ctrl space or Command space on a Mac, you get a list of the various formatting options we have to work with here. I am not going to go over all of these. You can play around with these in your own time to see what they do. It is not often you will need to change the format of your script anyway. But in today's example, we are dealing with volume right now. So let us click on volume and save the script. Now keep an eye on this number here. It is now changed to smaller number with a K after it. So if I hover over the last bar on my chart that says 6.037K, so roughly 6000 volume on this latest bar. So that is the purpose of the format parameter in the indicator function. Next up, we have precision. This is your decimal precision. So let me get rid of this format for now, and let me get rid of this really quickly and save the script to update it. The precision argument changes your decimal precision of the numbers that draw onto the chart in your script. So by default the precision is going to be set to the decimal precision of your price. So right now we have 5 decimals here on euro dollar. If we were to go to a different market like U Bitcoin for example, now we have a 2 decimal precision, and you can see after the decimal place here we have 2 digits. But if we wanted to override that to a higher precision or a lower precision, we can do that using the precision argument in this function. So let me set this to 5 and save the script. Now you can see 5 decimal places after the decimal place on this script. Now in this particular case we are just plotting the closing price, so that is not that useful seeing 5 extra or 3 extra decimal places on this price value. But what if we were plotting other values, other indicator values where we wanted to see those extra decimal places but we could not see them because of the number of the decimal on our price? So for example, what about a relative volume indicator? Let us say we want to compare today's volume or this bar's volume to the average over the past 10 days, and we want to know that number to 3 decimal precision instead of 2 just 2. That is where this argument comes into handy. You can change the precision, override the precision of your indicator plot values with this argument. We will be using this in future lessons, but for now we can move on. I will show you practical examples of this later on in the course. Next up, we have scale. So this is the scale axis you want to plot your values onto. By default, your indicator is going to plot onto whatever price axis you have on your chart. So in this case, we have price plotting onto our right axis. But if you wanted this to plot onto our left axis, for example, you can use the scale argument here. So we can set scale to scale dot control space. Let us set it to the left and save the script. And we need to remove the script to update this and add it back to our chart. Now you can see that our values here are being plotted onto the left scale, not the right scale. So again, not often you will need to do this, but there is an option to if you need to. Let us get rid of that for now. Save the script, remove it, add it back to our chart. So whenever you are dealing with a visual update like scale or overlay, you need to remove the script and read it back to your chart. So if you make a change to your script and it doesn't update, a general good rule of thumb is to try removing it, add it back on. That will force the tradingview to update your script entirely. Now the next parameter we have to work with is max bars back. This is not something you will often use in your scripts. I have never used it in my scripts to be honest, but it is here if you need to use it. Now this tells the script how many bars back it can reference from whichever current bar it is calculating on. So if we are looking at the final bar on my chart and we set max bars back to 10 for example, and I save the script, whatever code is running on this last script, this last bar on my chart, the script can only reference the past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bars. So only this price action here. Now personally in my own coding, I have written dozens of scripts over the years. I have never used this feature. I have never used this max bar back. I have never had to. I have never had a reason to. But if you do run into a situation where you need to use this function, this feature. This is how you do it. You can set your max bars back to 10. Just keep in mind that this is in reference to the current bar. So when your script is running over historical price action, each bar on your chart can look back 10 bars, and then this bar can look back 10 bars, and then this one, etc. So that is how this argument works. But let us get rid of it for now, since we would rarely use that. The final parameter I am going to cover here that is commonly used is time frame. So the time frame specifies what time frame your script can run on. So for example, let us drop down to the 4-hour chart and change this to D. So for example, let us drop down to the 4-hour chart and change this to D, short for daily, and save the script. Now my script is plotting the daily time frame closing price onto my chart instead of the 4-hour. So if I zoom in here, you can see that each time this updates, we get a new value down here. So on this bar here, a new day began and the previous day's closing price was 54,690, and then on the bars in between we get NA because these 4-hour bars are plotting in between the next day, and then on the next day's beginning we get the previous day's closing price, which was 57,487, and so on. So that is one way to hardcode your script to only reference a particular time frame. I would not recommend doing this. There are better ways to do this depending on the script. If you have a script that you only want to reference a particular time frame, you might want to hardcode it this way. But if you have a script that you want to be able to use on multiple time frames, you are better off using user inputs to specify the time frame of your script. And we will cover that in future lessons. I don't want to overload you with too much information, so we will leave this lesson here. If you want to see what these other parameters do, again just hold control and click on this function name, and you will get a list of the arguments we have here with detailed descriptions on how they work. But anyway, that will do it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Lesson number 5. Hi traders, this sort of lesson I will introduce you to the concept of namespaces. So namespaces in PES script are what we call the keywords that contain certain functions or variables. So that might sound a bit confusing, but when I show you a visual example, it should make perfect sense. There are several namespaces that we have access to in our PES script code. The first one I am going to show you is the technical analysis namespace. So for example, let us say we want to get the RSI value. To do that, I can create a new variable called RSI, and we can assign this variable or initialize this variable using the equal sign. So RSI is set, and then we need to reference the TA or technical analysis namespace. So if I write TA here, then a full stop, and then control space or command space on a Mac, we get a list of all of our technical analysis functions. So if I start writing RSI, here is our RSI function, and you can see here that it is underneath the TA or technical analysis namespace. So if I click on that, we pass in a price source. So close and 14 default period. There we go. We have an RSI value, and if I cut this plot down here and change the plot from the closing price to the RSI value we just retrieved, I save the script. We are now plotting the RSI. So PineScript makes it really easy to access all of the most popular indicator tools that traders typically use. And you will find all of your indicator function under the TA namespace. So that is really it for the namespaces. That is all you really need to know. You can also create your own libraries. We will cover that later on in the course. But when you create your own custom library, it behaves pretty much identically to these inbuilt namespaces. So for example, if I type in import Gen and the art of trading control space here is one of my libraries I have created. If I import this as Gen, I can now reference my Gen library namespace the same way we did with the technical analysis namespace. So for example, if I write here Gen control space or command space, we get a list of all of my custom functions. These are functions that I created, that I wrote in my own code in the Gen library script, and I published this to the TradingView platform. I can now reference all of these functions the same way we can reference the inbuilt functions that TradingView offers or PineScript offers. But as I said, we will cover libraries in future lesson because it is quite an advanced concept. So I just wanted to make you aware of that feature. And so you can basically think of a namespace as a collection of functions or tools that you have written, either you have written or the TradingView script developers have created. So before we end this lesson, we will go over just a couple of other namespaces. For example, if we are dealing with strings, so text, this is a string right here. If I create a variable called my string and we just call this a string of text, I can now use the string namespace. So str is short for string. If I put in a dot and then control space or command space, we get a list of all the different functions we can use relating to strings. So for example, if I set this to the text 10 and then I use the to number function and we pass in my string, if I cut that and paste that into our plot and save the script, we are now plotting the number 10 after using the string namespace to convert this text into a number. And there are a whole bunch of other namespaces. We have the strategy namespace when we are dealing with strategy scripts. So you have your trade commands and various variables that you can reference, such as your current account balance and things like that. We also have the request namespace, which we will cover in future lessons. This is where you retrieve or request financial data about stocks. You can reference Quandle, which is a third party resource that offers all sorts of things like a sentiment, interest rate information, and all kinds of stuff. We will cover the Quandle in future lessons. And then we also have the security function here, which we use to reference our symbols and other time frames. So you use the request dot security function to request. For example, we are on euro dollar 1 hour chart here. We would use the request dot security function. And so that is a quick crash course on PineScript's namespaces, and so that is a quick crash course on PineScript namespaces. and we will be using this frequently in our scripts. So you will get used to using this and you will soon memorize them all very quickly. Anyway, that is it for this lesson. I will speak with you in the next one.